Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. The white media's been making more than a little do about Joe Biden and his so-called police executive order. It's not an executive order at all, at least not in any substantive sense. Biden's executive order is a con, just as we expected. Let's go ahead and get the most obvious thing out of the way. His executive order has absolutely nothing to do with local or state police. It's simply an executive order that's meant for federal law enforcement, the type of police who have the least direct contact with black people. So it does nothing to address the murderers, rapists, thugs, and cowards who are committing crimes against black people daily. And if this little tactic sounds familiar, it should. Kamala Harris pulled the same stunt when she was Attorney General in California, except she put up more of a fight than Biden did. At least she made it very clear she didn't want to have to do anything at all. Now keep in mind, if Biden wanted to actually do something, remember when he proposed his admittedly weak police oversight commission during the 2020 election campaign? That's what he said he was going to do. But of course, as soon as he got into office, he said, I'm not doing that. Maybe Congress can do it, but, I got a lot on my plate and presidential police oversight committees. I don't think so. So now that the Democrats are looking at a potential bloodbath in the midterm elections, and Biden's poll numbers are lower than the average Republican's IQ, so now he's decided he's got to do something to try to perk those black votes up. But it's not going to be anything substantive, mind you. So he's going to pretend to finally do something when it comes to the police. But all of Biden's executive order, from the actual things that are in it to the way that it was put together, was just one big slap in the face to black people, which was the entire point. According to the Washington Post, this executive order, all it does is restores Obama's administration restrictions on the transfer of military equipment to police departments. It mandates body cameras for all federal officers. Most of them have them anyway, so what's the point? It restricts chokeholds and curtails no-knock warrants. It sets narrow limits on when force is permitted and requires officers to intervene to stop excessive force and to render medical aid. Now, keep in mind, this is for federal police. How many times have you heard of any cases where federal police have had some sort of fiasco regarding no-knock warrants? When's the last time you've heard about excessive force when it comes to federal law enforcement? Not to say that it doesn't happen. I'm sure that it does. White supremacy is everywhere. But the most egregious acts and the ones where it happens the most are not at the federal level. If Biden really wanted to impress somebody when it comes to federal law enforcement, then he could start by acknowledging that the Buffalo mass murderer had a friend in federal law enforcement who was advising him and talking to him, and then Biden would admit, you know what, we got white supremacists all throughout this federal government, and I'm going to go ahead and root them out. He doesn't mention that. He's sitting here doing something that won't actually accomplish anything. He's just giving you word salad. There's nothing but all sorts of weasel words and qualifying language in this thing. His executive order restricts chokeholds, but it doesn't ban them. Gee, didn't he and Kamala Harris talk about that? I vaguely recall some loose talk about banning chokeholds. His executive order curtails no-knock warrants, but doesn't get rid of them, doesn't ban them. He sets narrow limits on when use of force is permitted. What the world does that mean? Narrow limits? What do narrow limits mean? And the executive order, allegedly, requires federal officers to intervene to stop excessive force and render medical aid. But again, it doesn't define what excessive force is, nor does it spell out punishment for anyone who does use excessive force. It's a nothing burger. And while we're on the subject of excessive force, Biden made sure to run the entire executive order past the Fraternal Order of Punks, who had final say over every word of it. Quote, a phrase about how deadly force should only be used as a last resort when there is no reasonable alternative was cut. Then the AP piece repeats the garbage about prioritized de-escalation and intervention, etc., etc. Now, who has a problem with the use of deadly force only being a last resort? And what kind of president allows somebody to tell them, no, deadly force should never be an effort of last resort? Why, that's the first thing we do. As soon as you see one of these niggers, you got to make sure you kill them dead. As I'm going to detail in just a minute, this executive order, these aren't even executive orders. They're more like executive suggestions. The Aryan propagandist story talks about how Biden worked day and night to reach a deal on this. A deal? This isn't a congressional law. He doesn't need to get anyone's votes. He doesn't need to overcome a filibuster. He has executive powers. He just says it and it's done. And yet Biden and his flunkies, like the bedwench par excellence Susan Rice, spent months going to the Fraternal Order of Thugs, asking them if the executive language was okay with them. In fact, that's what the AP's entire story is about. It's about how Biden had to keep going back to them and how the Fraternal Order of Punks didn't like any of it. They opposed all of it, and how Biden bent over backwards and did everything that they told him to do, made sure that this thing was something that they wouldn't have too many problems with. Biden made it clear from the jump that he would simply repeat whatever the police told him to say. And that being the case, that means this executive order was written by criminals. Susan Rice, of course, lied, as she's done her entire adult life, claiming that this waste of words moves the needle substantially, when, as we've already explained, it does absolutely nothing. Even the racists at the Aryan propagandist had to refute Rice's asinine assertion. In the very next sentence after hers, the AP writes, "No one who believes that American policing needs to be overhauled, including the president himself, think the final order goes far enough." So there you have it. Biden's executive order is so pitifully weak that even with Susan Rice trying to stick up for it, the white media has to say, nah, nobody thinks it actually goes far enough. Oh, but the white media wants you to get excited. Biden made a deal. Look how hard he worked to make a deal. Yeah, he made a deal by just repeating what the police told him to say. Now, has Biden ever had black people exercise veto power or even have input to anything that he's proposed to Congress, to say nothing of his own executive orders? We're not involved at all. The AP piece says that Biden had to balance the tone of the executive order. And what did that mean? Add more language about rising violent crime and combating crime. Well, what about all of the police murdering black people? Police lawlessness? Police lying on the stand? Police violating their oaths to the public? The executive order is supposed to be about spelling out what's going to be done to finally rein in these gangs of criminals. This isn't supposed to be some crime bill. It's supposed to be about finally holding the thugs in blue accountable. Crime shouldn't even be mentioned, unless we're talking about theirs. We don't need to be cushioning the blow or sprinkling sugar on it so the racists and the police don't feel put upon. In fact, we need to be doing the opposite. They need to know that the government is declaring all-out war on police misconduct, and that they are squarely in the government's sights, that the government's gunning for them. They need to know that. This PR stunt was exactly the opposite, though. The AP piece reports that there wasn't much time left until the second anniversary of George Floyd's death. Now, first of all, George Floyd didn't die, he was murdered. That's the first thing. And that was established in a court, not once, but twice. And here you got the AP saying he died. No, it wasn't just a death, he was murdered. It's the second anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. But then again, what did you expect from a media clavern like the AP? And their puff piece goes on to say that no one at the White House wanted the day to pass without an agreement. Yeah, we want to be able to say that we did something on the date that George Floyd was murdered. So we see that's what this is really about. Biden wanted to be able to falsely claim that he did something regarding the thugs in blue, and why we even want to make sure for the symbolism value that it fell on the day that George Floyd was murdered. Because he hopes that black people are going to see this and think, oh, Jim Crow Joe, you finally did something for us. Biden is lower than dirt for this. He used George Floyd's own daughter as nothing more than a prop for this PR stunt. That child is like, 7 years old, I think? And all those bootlicking bastards behind him, the black misleaders, these step-infected sellouts, standing there smiling with him, looking at her, knowing that Biden was lying to a child's face, that he had betrayed the memory of her father and made common cause with his murderers. But I couldn't help but notice that in the picture, George Floyd's daughter isn't smiling. She's only a child, about 7 years old or so. I can only hope that it's because she realizes, or someone who cares about her has explained, that these people in Washington are not her friends. And they are not there to protect black people. They are not there to protect the next George Floyd from becoming a victim of white supremacist violence under color of law. They are there to encourage the next murder of a George Floyd, or even of her. This for them is supposed to be the second burial of George Floyd. They're trying to put a bookend on the threat of police accountability that his murder brought into being. George Floyd's daughter needs to know that the demons and devils she was surrounded by a few days ago, they're using her against her father. They're using her to sanitize and blackwash a move that's meant to embolden and encourage the next murder committed by the police. This was a sellout, plain and simple. And trying to use a sweet, innocent child, the very daughter of the man who Joe Biden's buddies in the Fraternal Order of Police killed, and a lot of those cops laughed about it and supported it and thought that it was a great thing, and they supported the murderer of that child's father, and he has no words of rebuke for them. Nothing at all. Having her hold up the pen that he used to sign this pile of worthless words, as if she's giving her seal of approval to it. She's a child. She has no idea what the hell kind of sellout is going on here. But in time, I think she's going to learn. In reality, all he did was copy and paste what the Fraternal Order of Punks told him to say. When you read the AP story, you see that's what the entire story is about. It's all about Biden bending over backwards just to make sure that he didn't offend the thugs in blue, but they were the only ones whose opinions he cared about. Absolutely nowhere in the entire article does all of Biden's so-called deal-making say even one syllable about whether black people liked his executive order or thought that it was acceptable. So the white media makes it clear the definition of a deal is when you agree to do whatever the punks in blue say. They don't even pretend that Biden was considering what anybody else thought other than the police. So that's exactly what this is a big sloppy kiss to the thugs in blue. All of it just a story about how Biden changed this, he removed that, he altered this, had to change the tone, he took notes from the Fraternal Order of Punks so he could reassure them that he was going to be their accomplice in all of the future murders and all of the rest of the crimes they're going to commit. Oh yeah, they had final say over this executive order. But AP did report that one part of the executive order that didn't change was a part that said the country should acknowledge the legacy of systemic racism in our criminal justice system and work together to eliminate the racial disparities that endure to this day. First of all, acknowledging the legacy of racism doesn't do anything. You can acknowledge racism all day long. That doesn't mean you're going to do anything about it. How many of the punks with badges claim to support Black Lives Matter in 2020? When the uprisings were going on, even the thugs in the NYPD, they were quaking in their boots. They were so scared that the public was going to hold them accountable that they had to take a knee. Just basically, we bend the knee to you. Literally, we're bending the knee. Anything to get out of the punishment that we've earned. So what changed after that? Absolutely nothing. And what does work together to eliminate racial disparities even mean? Just more gibberish, more weasel words? It means nothing. It says the country should work together, but this executive order was supposed to be addressing the criminality and the murders committed by the police. The country doesn't need to work together. The police need to stop working against the country. See, this is more of that white liberal patting themselves on the back. If we say that racism exists, why, you should be grateful because that's so bold and brave for these white supremacists to say. So it's no wonder that the punks with badges didn't have a problem with it. But when you tell a lie like this, you know the usual suspects have to be there to try to blackwash it and sanitize it, try to take some of the stink off of it. The front Negroes who the Democrats always keep around so they can trot them out at moments like this, so they can be the black sock puppets who tell black folks, we know this don't do nothing, but it's a start. That's the biggest lie in the book, by the way. You cannot say that something's a start unless you actually begin to do something. Mark Morial says that this keeps the dialogue going and helps create the sense that we can talk, and if we do talk, we'll find some common ground. Really? The police are the ones in the wrong, full stop. Moral people do not compromise with racism or injustice. There can be no compromise with white supremacy. Any movement that black people make of a necessity means that we have to move towards the continuation and supporting of criminals and brutality and injustice, and we're not going to do that. We have to talk and find some common ground. What common ground do we have with trash like Daniel Pantaleo? What common ground do we have with walking fecal matter like Kim Potter, or Michael Slager, or Jason Van Dyke, or Amber Geigers? What common ground do we have with murderers and anti-black racists? We need to create the sense that we can talk. Well, what do we and Derek Chauvin have to talk about? This is what Mark Morial says we should do. The only discussion that I want to have with Derek Chauvin is to show him what chamber his execution is going to take place at the prison. That's the only conversation we need to have. Keep the dialogue going. Derek Johnson, head of the NAACP, said we can't refuse to sit at the table. He also says this is a public policy opportunity. This nothing burger is supposed to be an opportunity for what? They always try to lie and say that this is all going somewhere. It's an opportunity. It's part of a series of steps. But the only place that these steps ever lead to is going around in a circle. Ebony Riley from Sharpton's Do Nothing organization, the National Action Network, she blathered about how we need to have conversations out loud. So this is what the Democrats' pet Negroes do. They lecture us that we need to talk and have a dialogue and conversation. That's the entire problem. The only thing we've ever had is talk. The time for talk was over 150 years ago. It's way past time we got to the part about taking action. We get to the part where the criminals get punished. See, that's the part that we never talk about. No more of these stalling tactics as they try to hold off the day when the thugs in blue finally get what they deserve, which is punishment. Anything that doesn't lay out how there's going to be a zero-tolerance policy for police misconduct is nothing more than a waste of time. And some of these clout-chasing black activists who are desperately trying to climb the ladder as they try to position themselves to be some kind of half-baked influence peddlers. Oh, they're seeing that they don't have the kind of support with Biden that they were hoping that they were having. Now they see they have no influence with them. And they're all disappointed because now they have to go explain to the black folks who are dumb enough to follow them why it is that Biden's ignoring them. They're beginning to realize they were played for fools. And why not? Because fools is what they are. One of these people said that Biden's executive order was a poor excuse for the transformation of public safety he promised. See, that's the whole problem, though. In this case, we can't say that Biden didn't promise anything. He didn't promise that the police were going to be transformed. All he promised was that there was going to be a commission that was going to tabulate how many crimes the police committed, and that there would be some recommendations, but he never said anything about a transformation of public safety. He said from the very beginning, at no point did he ever say that I'm going to transform things. He just said, no, we're going to count up how many people the police harm. So as the black media told you, when Biden said that he changed his mind about that proposed presidential level police accountability commission, that he wasn't going to do it, you see what happened. Biden's always been on team white supremacy, but you didn't need to wait until now to figure that out. His job, along with that of the white media, is to trick you into thinking his worthless gestures are somehow substantive when they're not. Fortunately, though, more and more black people are beginning to see through the con game, as we make sure to remind people of Biden's broken promises and the lies that he told. We're making it where people don't forget, where they remember. Yeah, you remember that he made promises to you. He's not just coming out of the blue saying that he ain't going to do something. He told you he would do things, and now he's turning around and saying, you know what, all that stuff I said, you can forget it. I'm not doing any of it. But I will do whatever the police tell me to do. Well, that might be good enough for the Jim Crow Joes and the Al Sharptons and the Susan Rices and the rest of the political whores who are on the take. But that's not good enough for me, and it shouldn't be good enough for you. The thugs with badges are the primary source of injustice and crime in America. And they've been the primary source of it for a dang long time. The public must take responsibility for its own safety. The police have declared themselves the enemies of justice. The public cannot and must not depend on the allies and supporters of murderers like Derek Chauvin to safeguard our communities. And make no mistake, they are ours, not theirs. They don't own the streets. We do. If there's anything that should have been learned by now, especially after the police's outrageous cowardice and their litany of lies in Uvalde last week, it's that the police are a street gang. Nothing more. And Biden is showing everyone that he's pledged his allegiance to that street gang. He literally takes dictation from these taxpayer-supported street thugs. Well, the black community is not helpless. We have no obligation to sit on our hands as these racists target us. We have a right to secure our safety and to be assured that when someone breaks the law and harms us, that they are held to account. We have a right not only to seek justice, but also to receive it. Biden made his statement, not that it was any surprise, but this executive order is him making his statement that he is squarely on the side of the thugs in blue, justice be damned. Well, it's time for the black community to send a response to that message. And the response must be that police reform can happen from the top down, or it can happen from the bottom up. But it's going to happen. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. John Womack, Rowlett Churchwell, Daryl Bledsoe, Eddie Newsom, and Quincy X. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.